Ah, the good Saint Alethea. Hurts your party, tickles your eardrums, rends your heart, and conveys the tragedy of live alive so well. There have been plenty of surprising story beats in JRPGs over the years. Octopath Traveler 2 in 2023, Persona 5 in 2016, Bravely Default in 2012, Radiant Historia in 2010, Persona 4 in 2008, Xenogears in 1998, Final Fantasy 7 in 1997, and Chrono Trigger in 1996. But even before all those games, and any game I've forgotten about in between, is the first most memorable and shocking perception-altering twist that stuck with me over the years. And that's the tragedy of the Kingdom of Lucrece and Live Alive, crafted by legendary director and producer Takashi Tokita in 1994. I love this game and play it almost annually. The events in Chapter 8 always hit me a little bit differently every time I play the game. This video is my attempt at explaining why I think this is one of the most cleverly written and powerful tragedies in a JRPG. Before I get further into this video, there will be heavy game enjoyment destroying spoilers in this video for those who haven't played through the game. It wouldn't be a tragedy worth talking about if it didn't have great meaning to everything that happens in the game, and this series of terrible events doesn't happen until near the end of the game. As important as Chapter 8 is to the main conflict of the game as a whole, in this video I talk about it without spoiling the 7 chapters that come before it. Still, you should definitely play the game before watching this video because it will spoil everything else. I'll be retelling a lot of what I think are the most important parts of Chapter 8's story, mostly for people who haven't played the game and don't care about being spoiled, or those that may have forgotten it. But it will also provide context for my discussion of a few, if not all, the ways Live Alive's tragedy can be interpreted. Live Alive's 8th chapter begins with a fighting tournament in the Kingdom of Lucrece. The king declares the victor shall marry his daughter, the Princess Alethea. The player plays through the entire chapter in the role of the Knight Orsted and sees everything play out through his perspective as a mostly silent protagonist. The first important event is the fight between Orsted and his friend the wizard Strabo in this tournament.
Know this, my friend. I will hold nothing back. I've yielded much to you, but not this day. Gods, grant me strength. Grant me glory deserved.
Orsted beats him, winning the tournament, and scenes play out where Alethea says her father is happy. She also tells Orsted she'll be faithful to him forever right before a flying demon carries her off in front of him. One of the most clever things the storyteller in this chapter does is never explicitly explain if there is a mastermind behind the demon who takes Alethea. The game itself misleads you to believe that's something that's really important, which detracts the player's attention from other important details in the chapter. The blame is placed on the Lord of Dark, and Orsted is labeled a new hero of Lucrece for his decision to save the princess. His new hero status even earns him adoration of the townsfolk, with one dude even giving him the shirt off his back. I thought this was just a silly scene the first time I experienced it, but it sort of shows how quick the people are to follow the trend in the kingdom. Anyways, Orsted begins his journey to the Archon's Roost to rescue the princess, joined by Strabo with some words that would leave you to believe him and Orsted are like best friends. First, they get the help of the old heroes who defeated the Lord of Dark in the past, Hash and Uranus. Uranus explains how the kingdom was over-reliant on Hash's strength and used him for their own needs. Darkness grew in Hash's heart as he realized how selfish the people were. So Hash decided to live as a hermit in the mountains. I see Hash's story as something of a foreshadowing of what it means to be a hero in Lucrece, even if it doesn't seem to reflect Orsted's current situation. Uranus cleverly insults Hash's pride to get him to join up, and they also get the Bryon Sword, which is the key to the Lord of Dark's abode. When the party reaches the statue room before the Archon's Roost, they fight and defeat what they initially believed to be the Lord of Dark. Hash immediately realizes that the demon they defeated was not the Lord of Dark. Sadly, Hash was dying before he even joined the party. His pride and his wish to die fighting was what brought him with us. Strabo is super anxious to find Alethea at this point. He turns his attention toward the markings on the statue. Hash entrusts the Bryon Sword to Orsted.
She waits. She hopes that help is coming still. By love and trust and faith will we be saved. A single soul's enough when against the world we stand. Apart. Alone. Believe in me. We plead. We pray. And answer they. I will.
To translate Hash's Lucretianese to English, when the world is against you, all you need is a single soul to believe in you. Plead and pray to them to believe in you, and that single soul will do so. A metaphor for Orsted's relationship to Alethea as he understands it. At least, that's how I interpret it. Strabo declares that Alethea isn't there. The runes activate, he tells everybody that the mountain's coming down, and that they have to retreat. But...
Oh, gods!
The door to the Archon's roost is blocked, so Orsted silently returns to Lucrece Castle with his only surviving party member, Uranus. If the king thinks this is a tragedy, he ain't seen nothing yet, or rather, he'll never see anything again. Orsted sees a strange vision in his sleep. This scene is also the new ending you see if you die at any point between now and the end of the chapter.
Don't touch me!
Then we get a scene of a dead man watching over Orsted. The sound of him leaving wakes Orsted up. Seems like Uranus was also having some nightmares of his own. Orsted goes for a little walk and finds the Lord of Dark sitting on the king's throne. No music plays as he defeats it. And after Orsted defeats the demon, the king's dead corpse appears where he defeated the demon. The minister comes in as Orsted backs away, and Orsted immediately becomes the enemy of the kingdom. He's blamed for Strabo's death too, and forced to flee the castle. Uranus is blamed by association with Orsted, and he's seized. Orsted flees to the nearby village where Uranus joined him, and everyone treats him like garbage now. A stark contrast to the attitude people had towards him at the beginning. A boy in the village still seems to trust him, but then his parents declare Orsted as a monster. That kid in the village is probably the only one in the entire kingdom that still believes in Orsted. Orsted returns to the castle, unable to figure out what to do next. He's seized, imprisoned, and tortured along with Uranus, who is now near death. Uranus asks Orsted why he came back, speaking of how the people's irrational fear and paranoia have warped them. Uranus uses the last of his strength to help Orsted escape, telling him to rescue Alethea with his dying words.
Deliver her with love, and by her love be saved. Redeemed, absolved, and proven good.
Your name and deeds are known to me, sir. Having witnessed your prowess firsthand, I am grateful for most thrilling spectacle. Let us be wed, for king and for country.
Then Orsted fights his way back out of the castle, finds a new party, defeats the Demon Lord, and lives happily ever after with the princess. Whilst Yoko Shimomura's sweet tunes play in the background. I'm just kidding. Orsted fights his way back to the sealed area of the Archon's Roost alone. On the way, he confronts 4 boss demons named after fears of specific things. The first is claustrophobia, meaning an extreme fear of confined spaces. The second is scotophobia, meaning an extreme fear of the dark. The third is acrophobia, meaning an extreme fear of heights. And interestingly enough, the fourth fear is different between the original Super Famicom version of the game and the modern remake. In the original game, it was called gynophobia, meaning fear of women, but in the remake, it's called hygrophobia, meaning fear of liquids. The first time I played through Live Alive, I didn't think too much about it, but these phobias could be physical manifestations of the ghosts haunting Orsted from all the psychological trauma he'd been through between the deaths of Hash and Strabo and his current situation trying to rescue Princess Alethea. Given how tricky the Lord of Dark is supposed to be, it's easy to think he's throwing these fears at Orsted, but it could also just be Orsted fighting his own imagination too. It's also important to note how Orsted is filling in Hash's role more as a hero as he levels up and actually learns Hash's skills. Once Orsted reaches the room that was supposed to have collapsed and killed Strabo, it looks perfectly normal like it did before he retreated with Uranus. He interacts with the statue Strabo was reading and enters a secret passage that leads directly to the peak. None other than a perfectly healthy Strabo greets him at the peak with scathing words, telling Orsted how he faked his death in order to be the sole rescuer of Alethea, whom he was in love with.
'Twas simple. Easy. With such fear, you fled. The contest's champion, so strong and bold. Abandoned good Hash. Hero left to rot. But blackest final crime soon to come. When guided I your hand in murder just. A thieving king who gifted you my love. Disgraced. Yet still you came to ruin us. As is your wont. A singular creature. Insatiable destroyer. Selfish beast. You've never been content to share your spoils. I've tried, friend. I believed that you could change. But that competition in you cannot. You'd never settle. Never let me win. Not even when I begged. For love. For love. You've no idea how I wept that night. You lustful wretch. How could you understand? You've never loved, nor lost, nor known shame. But that was then. I've newfound strength. You'll see. A final bout to settle it, my friend. To prove the faithful follower better. And champion crowned. Champion no more. You will repay my loyalty in death!
Strabo ultimately loses the final dramatic duel. Then Orsted rescues the princess and lives happily ever after. Just kidding again.
Don't touch him! Why? Why now, husband? I waited, but you never came, husband. In you I placed my trust. In you my faith. For father. Even though good Strabo, he... And yet, despite that wrong, he loved me still. He suffered. Dearly. For your sake. Your pride. A hero's legend built on sacrifice. With victories hard won by better men. Anointed hero! Glory to his name! And Strabo, sweet and humble, be forgot, but not by me. I'll not betray our love.
In probably the first portrayal of Nettorare in a JRPG, the one and only person Orsted thought believed in him declares her love for Strabo instead and takes matters into her own hands to join him in the afterlife with her happy dagger. I bet Strabo didn't tell her the part where he orchestrated her father's death. But irony makes a great vehicle for tragedy too. At this point, the story flashbacks to parts I've already emphasized in this retelling, so I'll skip past that to the clever part of the narrative where the game separates the player from Orsted's character and he speaks for the first time in the chapter. At least outside of battle.
Naught remains. Alone. Utterly alone. Cast out. Unloved. Outside the grace of gods. The Archons roost. They call this shrine of death. Yet nowhere do I spy our Lord of Dark. His throne sits empty, wanting for an heir. Did I not do all that was asked? Did I not serve and seek my fair and just reward? And for my deeds, they damn me. Name me demon. And who am I to deny it? Demon, then. renouncing former ties and titles. And in their place, I claim the Lord of Dark.
Before I talk about how and why Alethea's death scene and the events leading up to it are so powerful within the game, there are just a few things I need to highlight. You can actually speak to the ghosts of the people of Lucrece through Akira's telepathy in his dungeon during the final chapter, where you get the people's true impression of Orsted.
Am I his architect? And he, my work? Should I have stood aside? Renounced love's grace, like so much else before. But not this time. And so I led him to a throne of bone.
Within his heart I saw the seed of dark, surpassing mine. Such anger, sorrow, hate.
What fools they were. And I know better. Why?
I prithee, end this horror. End it now, ye must. He knows not what he has become.
And finally, this is the boss's attack, Saint Alethea. The name of the attack, giving Alethea the title of Saint as her visage warps, hints at how much she messed up Orsted with her actions. Interestingly, this attack is voice acted by Alethea's voice actresses in their respective languages, and gives a nuanced feeling according to which language you're playing in. If you had someone who never heard of Live Alive see and listen to Saint Alethea, they'd probably think that Live Alive is a horror game. And if you have played through Chapter 8, this attack has so much more meaning to it. That's everything as far as the Chapter 8 summary goes, so now I'll talk about what makes it such a great tragedy, not just from the player's perspective as Orsted, but potentially also from Strabo and Alethea's perspectives as well. Orsted is a flawed hero, one of the ingredients of a good tragedy, although it's harder to see when you're actually playing as Orsted, and thus a lot more likely to sympathize with him as he is also a silent protagonist. Hash himself sensed the potential for great darkness looming in Orsted, while Strabo is no saint of light himself, and admittedly we can't exactly see Strabo's relationship with Orsted before the events in Chapter 8. We know that Orsted is competitive and doesn't seem to care if his own actions work against the interests of others. Also, in his own words at the end of Chapter 8, he says, "Did I not serve and seek my fair and just reward?" Which could be interpreted to suggest he felt the princess's love was his reward through his victory over Strabo rather than considering her feelings. There's a popular theory that the scene right before Alethea's death implies that Strabo and Alethea had a romantic relationship even before the events of this chapter, but as we only see the world through Orsted's eyes at the beginning of the tournament, we can't clearly know. I will say that Alethea's actions definitely make more sense if she had feelings for Strabo before Orsted won the tournament. Under that rationale, Alethea said all those sweet words repeated in multiple flashbacks to Orsted out of duty to her own kingdom and her father rather than following her own feelings. In that sense, the real cause of the tragedy was Orsted ruining the romantic relationship between Strabo and Alethea, first by beating Strabo in the tournament at the beginning of the game, and second by ending any chance Strabo and Alethea had of ever being together by killing Strabo at the end of the chapter, which is again forced. Once Alethea knew she could never be with her true love Strabo, she offed herself. In this case, Orsted either knew he was getting between Alethea and Strabo and didn't care. It's also possible he was ambitious and wanted to become the next king. Or, what I like to believe if this theory were the case, Orsted had no idea Alethea and Strabo had feelings for each other before he won the tournament, like the player controlling him. Under this theory, Orsted is the inciting element of the tragedy, getting in the way of Strabo and Alethea's relationship. He's undeniably the villain, but his actions were driven by a noble duty for his kingdom and as Alethea's fiancé. As the player controls Orsted, it's much easier to sympathize with him as a hero and not see things through this theory. The fact that in almost all RPGs, especially prior to 1994, the player plays the good guy also makes this theory harder to believe. I think it's brilliant how Takashi Tokita used the unique characteristics of the JRPG storytelling medium to strengthen the player's connection to Orsted while simultaneously writing the other characters, especially in Akida's dungeon, in such a way as to leave the interpretation open that Orsted may not have been as innocent as the player was led to believe. Orsted isn't suffering from amnesia, so it's not like information that's explicitly hidden from the player like a lot of RPGs love to do. But he's also a silent protagonist, which the player only controls during a certain part of his life, where his past isn't even really considered. We don't really get other people's impressions of him until later in Chapter 8 and then the ghosts in Akida's dungeon. Personally, I still blame Strabo for everything. His selfish actions in making Orsted kill the king completely destroyed Orsted's life when he already had Princess Alethea in his clutches. Strabo is also the aggressor who attacks Orsted at the end. I find it difficult to consider Strabo a good guy when he made Orsted murder the king. It also wasn't the best idea for Alethea to declare her eternal love for Orsted immediately after he won the tournament either. If her heart belonged to Strabo, she really should have just told him, seeing as how he was supposedly friends with Strabo anyways. To me, she's a little easier to forgive since she did have a duty as the princess to do things in the best interest of her father, the king, rather than her own. But man, did she choose the absolute worst time to completely turn on Orsted. Another dimension to the tragedy is that Orsted never got the chance to tell her that Strabo orchestrated the murder of her father, but given how obviously disturbed she was by Strabo's death, I doubt she would have believed, let alone forgiven, Orsted. Probably the theory most people, including myself the first time I played the game, had when playing the game is that Orsted simply did nothing wrong. He was fooled into killing the king, and he killed Strabo in self-defense when attacked. The game does a great job of making us think the Lord of Dark is the real enemy in the chapter. But Strabo is slowly built up to be the antagonist. He declares he won't hold back in the tournament for Alethea's hand in marriage. We can also see he cares pretty deeply about finding Alethea in his dialogue during the events after the party defeats the fake Lord of Dark, like an obsession with the willingness to make his friend murder his lover's father just to be with her. Although we get a huge hint with Strabo right before Orsted kills the king, we never explicitly see Strabo actually do anything bad until the very end, as he's assumed to be dead. Hash's final words stated they never defeated the Lord of Dark, so it's easy to assume the real Demon King was hiding and feeding Orsted illusions of Strabo and the monster on the throne. And all those phobias Orsted encounters on the way to the peak of the Archon's Roost were from the real Lord of Dark grooming Orsted to take its place. So it's actually a big shock when Strabo is alive and confronts Orsted at the end, playing the role of a demon king or a hero if Orsted really was the villain. Seeing events like this, Alethea's love was the inciting element to the tragedy as Strabo's desire and Orsted's last hope. The funny, ironic thing about this entire antagonist situation, if anything in this entire fudged-to-death burning pile of detritus can be seen as funny, is that Orsted himself acknowledges at the end that the Lord of Dark didn't even seem to exist. It's like he was chasing an illusion the entire time, while everyone around him is looking for someone to blame for all the bad things that happened. Orsted just became that person. Another important aspect of designing tragedy is to create a sense of hopelessness. This all begins in the middle of the chapter with Hash's death, is moved along with Orsted being manipulated to kill the king, and seeing his last friend in the world, Uranus, tortured and killed. If Strabo and Alethea are the protagonists, and in love since the beginning, their sense of hopelessness begins right after Orsted wins the tournament and is forced into a political marriage with Alethea. And the last, most important feature of a tragedy is to create a situation for the hero worse than death. Orsted meeting his best friend Strabo, whom he thought was dead, only to find out that this friend turned his life into a living hell by making him kill the king, was stage 1 of this. And the clincher was finally learning that Alethea, the only person he thought loved and believed in him, but loved Strabo and hated him instead at the very end. Because those two things weren't tragic enough, Princess Alethea blames Orsted for ruining Strabo and her own life before offing herself in classic Shakespearean fashion with a dagger. If Alethea and Strabo are seen as the heroes, their fate worse than death is never being able to be together. All that tension just built up throughout the chapter to peak right at one extremely shocking moment with Princess Alethea, ultimately leading to the birth of the new Demon King. I mentioned how these events always hit me differently every time I play this game. Sometimes I sympathize more with Orsted, and sometimes I try to see things from Strabo or Alethea's side. I usually just end up blaming Strabo for everything. It's also easy to question whether Alethea even had feelings for Orsted to begin with, as she highlights her father's happiness before she tells Orsted those sweet words. I attribute this ambiguity to the fact that the characters are drawn in pixels and not represented photorealistically, so we can't see the expressions on their faces. In the remake, we can hear their voices and read their words, but we can only imagine their expressions. The mood is built through Yoko Shimomura's amazing soundtrack and the colors on screen. Chapter 8 of Live Alive is one of those chapters I think would adapt really well to theater. Personally, I don't think there's a right answer when it comes to whose fault it is. Uranus said it best in Akida's Trial of Heart when he said everyone was a fool. But yeah, it's a fantastically written tragedy that can be seen as such from multiple perspectives. the player as Orsted, Alethea, and Strabo. As someone who's seen a ton of stories since the late 80s in games, anime, and manga, I think Live Alive might also be one of the pioneers of the whole hero turned demon lord trope that became popular in a lot of those stories too. It's no wonder Nintendo themselves really wanted to see this game on the Switch and did the marketing and publishing for it in the remake's Western debut in 2022. That's all I have to say, but I probably missed some things, so let me know in the comments section below. This entire video is attempting to explain only one of the things that makes Live Alive so special at the end of the game, but the other 70% of the game is fantastic too, for completely different reasons. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.